Welcome to another episode of the CANIE Climate Dialogues, our little podcast at the intersection of international education and climate action. I'm CJ Tremblay, and today we are going to be talking about how our work as international educators intersects with climate justice. And this particular episode serves as an appetizer, if you will, for the two-part CANIE Live series on climate justice and international education. Our two-part series is scheduled for February 9th and February 23rd, 2021. If you are listening to this episode before either of those dates, you can register on the CANIE website at can-ie.org. If you're listening to this after that date, you can find information on the replay at the same website. We're going to have this available as a free resource for as long as it is relevant, which, spoiler, is going to be a very, very long time. Okay, so as we've discussed on every episode of this podcast to date, climate justice is the foundation of the work around climate action. It has to be. And today we're going to unpack a little bit and talk about the why. This is a really important conversation for us practitioners to have with ourselves, to have with our colleagues, and to have with our leaders. So I'm super excited about today's episode. Our hope for it is that it will serve as a great learning opportunity wherever it is that you listen to it for the first time, whether it's immediately after it's released, as my mom probably will, or whether it's a year from now. So our upcoming series is the inaugural CANIE Live event that isn't one of our signature climate action summits. This webinar is content that we hope will last for a long, long time, which is super cool, and we really hope you check it out. This event will also serve as a reunion of two winners of the Pioneer Awards. Melissa Lee from the Green Program is really going to be talking about the intersection of international ed and climate action. Andrew Gordon from Diversity Abroad, a specialist in the international education and racial justice space. And they will also be joined by one of the best friends of CANIE, Robin Shields from Bristol University, who has done a lot of work at the intersection of international education and climate action. So this conversation on our live event is going to be moderated by our very own, CANIE's very own Ine Williams, who you will meet today. So what does that mean that today's episode look like of this podcast? Well, it looks awesome. That's what it looks like. Adrienne Fusek returns as our CANIE co-host, and today's episode will feature two important players in the aforementioned series. And so Ine Williams is going to be here, and later we'll be joined by Melissa Lee, who's the CEO and founder of the Green Program. But first, Adrienne. Adrienne, welcome back.
Thank you. I guess I did okay last time. I listened to it and all I could hear was my ums. So I'm going to try better this time. Sorry, listeners.
I hear you. I think that I was enamored with you, so I didn't hear any of your ums, so for what it's worth. But we have a great episode today. I'm so excited for the conversation we're going to have. And it was so much fun having you here and your passion aligns with this topic so much that it only felt right to have you back again.
Thank you for having me again. Yeah, I'm really excited about the conversation with Ine and Melissa, and really kind of a little bit more excited, can I say, for the live event that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, you can say. And it's funny because we're just on the back end of that event, right? I'm so excited to just manage the chat. I'm so excited just to be on the chat and support the event. It's gonna be awesome. So that will be very cool. So, but you mentioned Ine. Listen,
yeah, I did.
I gotta give you full credit here. It was you who shared with us the CANIE board, the gift that is Ine. And so that's so awesome because you guys used to work together, right?
Yeah, we did. And honestly, introducing Ine to CANIE was really selfish on my part, because she worked at San Diego State University and with me and a bunch of other really great people who are working in international ed over there. And she moved on. And so now she's working as a consultant, and I just really missed working with Ine, and I thought she would have a lot to add to this conversation. And so now I get to continue working with her. And so I feel like it was a selfish act, but I feel like it's also working out really well. And
yeah, like a textbook definition of a win-win to me. That's
right.
what that feels like.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna give everybody a little bit of info about Ine, and then we will welcome her to the screen. Wait, to the podcast, not to the screen, to those of you who are joining us on the screen. Ine has more than 15 years of experience in the field of international education. Her primary focus has been on student mobility and international student and scholar services. And as both a practitioner and manager, she has led efforts in cultural programming and international student orientation, international student and scholar immigration advising services, exchange and study abroad program management, and more. Her passion and efforts have been recognized by way of various staff nominations and awards during her 13 years in the California State University system, and she has a deep belief in creative and efforts and collaboration. And I can confirm that she is deeply collaborative as a member of our CANIE board, as she strives to fuse and immerse the intersecting crises of like climate action, racial justice, and many other additional global inequities. We are so glad she's here, and I'm so glad for you all to get to meet her. Ine, welcome. This is awesome.
Hello.
We're so glad to have you here.
So excited to be here. This is my very first time being on the podcast, and I'm loving it already.
Yeah, get used to it, my friend. I'm so excited to have you here. I know Adrienne also equally excited, as you heard the like glowing introduction. Big fans of yours over here. So, you know, you're on the CANIE board. We'll eventually have you on as a CANIE co-host, but today you are here as our guest because we want to hear from you. You're the moderator of the CANIE Live event on understanding the intersection of climate justice and international education, which is so awesome. So thank you for doing that. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved with CANIE, and why, when Adrienne sort of leapt at the opportunity to sort of ask you to join our little family, what is it that drove you to commit so much of your time to this project?
Well, I know you've shared already with listeners a little bit about my background through the bio and everything, but I wanted to maybe point out that going into international education was my second career. I was a scientist before all this. My entire plan was to be this person that worked with animals in nature and did research. So when I got into international education, my focus was on helping STEM students first. And then I realized all the students needed help because the United States wasn't really involved with, deeply involved with international education in terms of getting students outside of the US to experience things. When I worked with Adrienne, I was the associate director of the study abroad office there at the time. And I left because of COVID. So I was feeling like I was being impacted by what was going on directly. I didn't get sick with COVID. I was sick with other stuff, but I didn't get sick from COVID. But I had to leave to move to another state and help my family out. And I'm still doing that. And I have to go between a rural environment where my mother is and a more kind of rural suburb area. So that was why I'm no longer working with Adrienne. Now, CANIE came about because I work with such great people at SDSU that we stayed in touch. And Adrienne reached out to me and told me about her involvement. I was lucky enough to hear about some of the work she was doing and learning about with the sustainable goals. And then now with CANIE, she asked me if I wanted to get involved because of just the experiences we've had working together. And she invited me to one of the first meetings that I was able to attend. And from that, that to me was what made me want to join. CANIE being this grassroots organization with passionate international educators from around the world means that this type of topic isn't going to be from one perspective or one direction. It means that you can really pull from different actions happening all around the world and see if they might work well in your context. I really like that idea that in the effort to take action, we're being intentionally global about it, and also with the emphasis on creating a network of people that can really support one another, as well as kind of pull from one another at the same time. So CANIE, to me, I've only been part of CANIE since like August 2020. And you can see I'm just getting in there and starting with everybody else. The time that I am putting in is anything around my obligation to my family and whatever I'm doing already. But I think that's part of the reason that this has been so great, is because everybody cares deeply enough about the topic to want to spend that time doing this. It is completely run by volunteers. So you have to care and want to do this in order to be involved. And I think that's just something to note. If you are interested in getting involved in CANIE, if you're hearing this and you're thinking, wow, that's a great story, I want to get involved. You don't always have to get involved to the same extent, but this is, in the board, we get to have a voice and talking about things and figuring out actions that we want to take. But everybody could potentially have that opportunity to be part of making change in the field of international education. So I'm really appreciative for the opportunity to do that and the privilege to do that, even with my poor internet out here in lovely rural suburbs.
Yeah, the internet struggle is real, as you often, and I think that's a really important part of all of the discussions we're having. So a quick sort of, what, we talk a lot about people's climate stories, right? Like you get passionate about the things that are important to people, get passionate about the things that sort of affect them and connect to them. So we're always really interested in hearing like what's like your climate story. And I know that you're gonna share it with us and our audience. But I think that this is a great, and we'll get to know you as you show on, as you attend and co-host many more podcasts. But I think that just sort of a quick primer on like, what's your climate story, Ine?
I think that what people know me most for is the fact that I don't own a car. I have never owned a car, and that is a choice. I know that some people can't own a car or, need to have a car because of where they happen to live. I realized very quickly, growing up in urban spaces, that I could get around through alternative means. I didn't need a car. I could take public transit. I could ride a bike. I could walk. And so people in SoCal got to know me because I was a person that was riding my bike to meetings at work, my little folding bike, and popping into the offices. I also advocated for getting that kind of knowledge out to the students. So creating spaces for students to understand you can have a great time where you are, with international students in particular, without a car, getting students from the local areas to get on a bus for the first time ever. So I would say being part of the bicycle coalition in the cities that I lived in, all these types of things, like looking at policy behind alternative transportation, that's, I would say, one of the most constant things that I've been involved in across the entire time I've been part of the international education field. But in my life, personally, I also have just always been more veggie conscious. I'm now 100% plant-based because I wanted to do that to deal with some health issues, and that's actually been working well for me. I also have always tended to be that kind of thrifty, upcycling kind of person. So when I studied abroad in Canada, for example, which isn't really abroad, but when I studied outside of the United States, I went to Canada and I had an amazing time. And I remember one of the things everyone used to say to me is, wow, how did you come up with the idea? That's so creative. Why'd you think to do that? When I was doing all these things like taking their trash and creating it into something really unique, or using it to make a gift, or going to thrift shops to grab stuff I needed. I said, y'all, it's called being poor. So at the time I was just like, it's called being poor, creativity. No, this is necessity. But then, that's really been part of my life too. I've always really thought about ways that I can support my local communities, ways that I can make different choices that do not hurt the earth and the people in it. and ways that I can also benefit from getting to know people. So when I'm not in my car, I don't have one, but when I'm not in a car, I actually talk to people more. I actually get to know what's going on in my neighborhood. So all those are things that help my community, help the earth, help me too. So that's a little bit about my climate piece.
I just want to add real quick, Ine, I think you inspire people through your action in terms of helping them take action. So for example, I remember when you first moved to San Diego, I think you were coming from China, and you created this whole incredible list of free things to do in San Diego. And I had lived in San Diego for several years. I was like blown away by how quickly you were able to put all this stuff together. And then also on another kind of related note, I mean, I would be running to a meeting, you know, and I knew Ine was going to be at that meeting too, but then I see her fly by on her little folding bike. I was like, okay, there she goes, you know, but I think you're just, by being you and by doing the things that you do, people catch on to that. And I think that helps them to take action in their lives as well. So thank you for what you do, just in general. Thanks for being you, Ine.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that one, because we're certainly better off as an organization for having your perspective and your advocacy for, you know, I think everything that we do at CANIE, we try and make it accessible as possible. And that's been a value from the beginning, and sort of your advocacy for that, and sort of passion to drive that has always been sort of a founding important piece of that work, right? From everything that we do, making it accessible, and all the work that we're doing now, making sure that we can sort of be as inclusive as possible and accessible, and having as few barriers as possible. So yeah, we're certainly glad to have finally introduced you to the CANIE podcast audience, and super excited for more of the sector to get to meet you at the upcoming event. And so, yeah, I think with that, we're ready to get into it and bring Melissa into this.
Let's do it.
Our friend Melissa Lee is the founder and CEO of the Green Program, which in these parts, you'll hear us call TGP. TGP is an award-winning experiential education program for young leaders in sustainable development. For her work with TGP, Melissa was recognized by the National Association of Women Business Owners, Philadelphia Magazine's Best of Philly, and the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in education. And you'll hear this from her today. Melissa is driven by a desire to reshape higher education curricula to include purposeful, hands-on experience for students. As CEO, she expanded TGP beyond its roots as an experiential education program, partnering with the United Nations and leading universities to create a global, socially conscious public benefit company. Melissa has also served as a U.S. Global Schools Ambassador for the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network and a Heinz Distinguished Lecturer at the University of Pittsburgh. Amazing, right? We are so glad she's here with us today. Melissa, welcome. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, CJ and Adrienne and the whole CANIE team for including myself in the Green Program. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, we are super excited to have you here because you reached out to me after the first International Education Climate Summit in May. And sort of we've worked on a couple of initiatives for practitioners and really like exploring collaboration for a while. So we are big fans of the Green Program here on our pod. We have an upcoming session at the Forum for Study Abroad, a few conference proposals in the works, and now our upcoming CANIE live event on climate justice and international education. We've had a lot of weekly meetings.
Yes, I know. It's amazing what one email can do, right? And just bringing together such like-minded and passionate organizations too. So I know I speak on behalf of the team when we're super thrilled to just dive into not just one thing, but a slew of different projects with CANIE. And I think that's how we're going to make it through all this together is making sure that we all stick together and work through it together.
Yeah, no, too real. We are super excited about this upcoming event, which is kind of part of why we're all here today. Our listeners have heard us say over and over that the conversation about climate action cannot happen without it being anchored in the conversation of climate justice. So we're going to be exploring that in depth at our upcoming event. But today I wanted to talk to you about like how it came to be, and to have a bit of a primer so people could listen to before that. So Adrienne and I have lots and lots of questions for both you and Ine. So let's jump right in. Yeah, ready?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Okay, so Melissa, please tell us a little bit about the Green Program.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start, even before the Green Program, just some context about myself. But I did start the Green Program when I was 19 years old, a very lost university student, studying undecided for the first few years of my undergraduate career. But before I went to school, I'm a first generation born American. My family is from Malaysia. And growing up, I had that privilege to be able to travel and go to experience other countries, other cultures, other communities, other ways of life, lots of diversity and exposure in my life as well. So I had that privilege to be around that and be surrounded by that as just like values and principles. And when I went to university, I quickly realized that so many of my friends maybe have never even left the home state or their hometown. So that was really interesting to me, of just being able to see, how we could all be living in the same bubble on a university campus, but have so many different life experiences, just right off the bat. And, it didn't take me a very long time at 18, 19 years old to really realize that something was really missing in my personal experience in higher education. Something about going to a 300-person lecture room every single day for hours on end, and listening to very valid points of research and reading lots and lots of books on just studies and studies and studies. But, I grew up being able to sit at a dinner table with my grandmother and my family, listening to their stories, and listening to how my father's side of his lifestyle growing up came from a lot of like the slums in Malaysia and what it was like growing up in poverty, and how their story was, right? Like just to get out of that situation too. So there was a big contrast between what I was learning in the classroom and what were lived experiences, and for many other people in the rest of the world. So, long story longer, basically, there was an experience and exposure missing in higher education for me. And through that, I was able to, start bridging an experience gap through the Green Program to be able to expose more students to the world, use the world as the classroom. And what better way to expose and train our future generation than to talk about sustainability and to talk about our world's most pressing issues, because if our higher institutions, if they're the ones who are supposed to be training our future workforce and our future problem solvers, who else is going to do it? It needs to be happening in that generation, if not earlier. So, what we've done at the Green Program is really say, okay, how do we design with intentional design, short-term experiences that bring the world to life, that bring the classroom to life, and really engage students in the good, bad, and ugly of our world's most pressing issues in sustainable development. So, our programs look like going into Iceland to study renewable energy innovation. It looks like going to Fukushima, Japan, studying disaster mitigation and nuclear to renewable transitions. And really exposing students to what's happening on the ground and working with locals and using a local perspective when we're building that all out as well, which we can talk about more later. What we specialize in is industry access. So what that means is when we're in Iceland, we're going to say Iceland's largest geothermal power plants. You're being taught by the lead engineer who designed that power plant, and that she's your professor. She's also a she, as a point to make there too. So we're really bringing design into play, into education, and also taking our world's biggest problems into perspective here and helping align students' degrees to what is actually going to matter in the world and what they should start channeling that into. And hopefully that's a future workforce there. So now we have about 3,000 plus alumni that are all making a difference in the world around the world. You name it, they're at NASA, SpaceX, General Electric, they're the ones making the difference in the world. And that's really, what we're here to do. So that's us in a big nutshell.
That's awesome. It's so amazing to hear you speak about TGP, because every time we talk, I learn a little bit more, and I'm just always so inspired. So first, thank you for all of the work that you've done, and thanks in advance for all the work that you continue to do. So Ine and Melissa, I want to learn a little bit more about your personal drivers into this conversation. So Melissa, you shared a little bit about your family history and how that relates to where you are now and what you've created. But tell us more about your personal drivers into this specific conversation. And Ine, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everyone. I'd say that a lot of my personal thoughts on this come from my experiences in the education field. Since we're really going to be talking about the intersection of climate and international education, the first piece is connected back to my educational experiences growing up. So I would say that starting out, one of the things I was really clear about as a student in school was the education experience I was having wasn't something I was happy with. I would go, I would do what I needed to do, but I didn't feel like I was learning about anything that was necessarily relating back to me and what was important to me. And anytime I wanted to learn about those things, I had to go externally. I also was a person that really liked to be in nature. So I wanted to be outside all the time. And when you go to school, you're inside most of the time for the most traditional way. The most traditional educational experiences are sit in a row, listen to somebody in front of you, take everything that they say as truth, and then regurgitate it. I thought it was horrible. So part of my history is that I talked to my mom about these things, and she kept trying to find different schools that would be better suited, public schools, and kept pulling us out because of all of these different systemic issues that were connected back to being Black and how they were treating students that were Black or poor or of different backgrounds in school. So my climate piece of the educational components of environmental piece, it had nothing to do with my K through 12 or even my earlier college experiences at first. It was all my personal experiences. My parents took me outside all the time. They were always trying to make sure that we had access to do things in nature, free things, right? These are all accessible. And a lot of that was connected back to living decisions. Where are we going to live as a family, right? So we would try to live places where we had access to greenery outside and that they didn't have to worry about us going outside and playing and meeting other kids. So for the first 12 of my years of my life, it was idyllic. I got to be in a place where people from all over the world, green everywhere, everybody let their kids go till dark, and then that was life. And then we had some financial problems and we had to move. We were homeless for a while, and we finally found a new place to live. And it was in a completely different neighborhood. I was excited that the neighborhood was going to be predominantly Black. I was super excited because that was the first time I was going to have that experience. But when we got there, people were great. The neighborhood was not so great as far as what I liked. There was cement everywhere. No, there was a park, but there was like literally all cement. So all those experiences started to make me think, what's going on? Why is this neighborhood no parks? This is a kid's version, right? I just started thinking about those things. I went to UC Santa Cruz for college, and in that school, they were very big on environmentalism. So everything we talked about in the beginning was about appreciating nature, but not talking about the people. It was still about nature. So I love nature, but I was really finding a disconnect. I guess what I could say is like this. Imagine, if you will, that in your everyday life, you are having people treat you differently. But then, and when you talk about something like the environment, they'll say things like, oh, we have to save the animals. We have to save the planet. And you're wondering about all the problems that exist every day that you're experiencing that no one's talking about or even acknowledging. So I would say there was this real huge disconnect between why aren't people talking about people? Like, so part of my personal journey was just literally starting to learn more about the climate. I'm not an expert in climate issues. I'm not an expert in sustainability. I didn't study those types of things. I was a science major in college. I'm also not an expert in racism or anti-racist education, but it's something that I'm passionate about knowing how to know more about, but also knowing how to apply in my life and in my industry. So that's why I got involved with CANIE in the first place. Was I thought it was going to be really important to make sure that on the journey of connecting international educators in this action, we should be thinking and making sure it's human-centered, it's people-centered, and not just climate-centered. And I think CANIE's already showing with putting together this event in the starting point of this, that that's going to be a key component to make sure that climate change can be addressed. So.
Yeah, I'm with Ine. My personal story is very personal. You know, it's tied to me and my lived experience too. And it was also my lived experience in nature, and having the privilege to be exposed to it and having the privilege to have accessible nature around me. One of my most vivid memories growing up was going to Malaysia when I was young, and it was my first time scuba diving. I did an open water dive when I was 11, when it was my first dive, and I'm a certified rescue diver now. But that was my first exposure, or my first realization to how powerful exposing people to nature really is. And really, maybe just not nature, maybe it's everything. You know, if you expose anybody to something beautiful, or what they would identify as something beautiful, the chances are likely that they are going to want to protect that, right? So for me at 11 years old, it's like swimming with coral and all the little Nemos and all the fish and all these creatures that I've never seen before, and then realizing that they're endangered at 11 years old. You don't need scientists to tell you that, you know, it's you know that, and at 11, that's something that's so innate that says, like, I want to protect that, whatever that means. I don't know yet. So it was just having personal connections like that. And I think that's what going back to education is missing, is we are really good at educating, I think, but I don't think we're as a society, good at exposing people or teaching people to listen to other cultures or other forms of life even, and even how do we not just understand it, but how do we interconnect as a species and live more cohesively with nature as well. I think that's a larger conversation there too. So yeah, my story is very much connected with exposure and being lucky to have that exposure. The impetus for this event was, for me, sitting, you know, it was last year from a work from home setting, and it was chaos last year. We had a pandemic, we have protests, we have injustice left and right. And I was checking my email, and I remember refreshing my inbox that day, like multiple times, and seeing no email come through after George Floyd's death from any of the listservs that are in the industry. I ended up writing an email to everybody and call to action, and also just bringing my team together saying, stop everything we're doing. We need to do something here, which ended up being an open source library, and to help with action and education for environmental and also racial injustice too. So from there, you know, more pieces started coming together, but it was how disturbing the silence is really what got me to say, like, hey, CJ, I don't know you, but we got to do something. Let's talk, right, for CANIE. So we got to do something and put our heads together.
And for that, I think we are all better off. And I personally am very grateful. So, thank you both for sharing like your personal stories and your lived experiences, and making this connection that I think sometimes, quite frankly, is perhaps missed in the context of climate action, right? Like and I'll be the first person to say, we have a very short runway to make change, right? We talk about having a short runway to make change. But we're not making change because of the planet. Like, the planet's not going anywhere. We have to make change for the people who live on this planet, for it to be a place, an environment where like humanity can thrive. And if we are not doing so in a just fashion, then what are we even doing? And so, you know, that lived experience you talk, because practitioners in sustainability are about, you know, 70% white women. So most of them like look like me. And this call is just like so energizing, where it's just like 4 women and 1 white woman. And it's just like, we have, you know, power structures in our industry. So, you know, sustainability is typically around 70% women. International education practitioners skew like white and female, but the power structures, you know, those people at the top tend to be like white males. And so, you know, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the majority of the people in our sector don't have the lived experience of specific impacts of racial injustice. And so I would love to hear both like from Ine and Melissa, your unique perspective on how this sector specifically can benefit from this conversation on the connection between climate justice and racial justice. Yeah, Ine or Melissa, I'll let either one of you go first. Ine?
Yeah.
Great.
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how much my background is in study abroad, mostly in most recent experiences, but I also worked previously with international students. And when I think about being in a student-centered space and what we're trying to do with addressing climate issues, we're sending students away and we're welcoming them to the United States. Those are the 2 main things in mobility, right? Now, when we send students away, we send them off with this idea, you're gonna have these different experiences, these transformative experiences, but there's not always, not in every institution, something that connects them to how that relates back to home, right? And so when you're talking about something like a climate experience, it's often, to me, seen as this other for a lot of people that are privileged enough to not have it impact their everyday life. It's this something in the future that's gonna happen that I need to know about that's urgent. And oftentimes, just it seems like the images that we see are connected back to not being part of your experience, whether it's your neighborhood or your city, your state, any of those, it's somewhere else. So when you go abroad, sometimes that's a really great way for someone to get excited about climate, but they don't even understand sometimes the impact that their travel there is having on that climate piece. They don't know a lot about the neighborhoods that they're in. They might only go to a very particular part and not see the imbalance that's happening. I think international education has to do a lot better job at infusing views and voices that give people a more holistic experience of what's going on, both on the leaving home and on the coming to the United States. Because when I think about international students, and I've had so many different interesting conversations about international students on things like race. And just even things like police interaction. Think about that. So when I remember working with international students and I talked to a few just personally and learned from them that if in their country, if a police stopped them, they were supposed to get out of the car immediately. I was like, oh my God. I said, do not do that here. And I told my colleagues, we have got to add some training on how to interact with police in our orientation sessions and get police to be part of the knowing our students and them to know the police and make sure people understand that there's some differences here, because that could be a dangerous scenario. I think we've all heard about old cases from a long time ago where students have, international students have been killed just because they didn't know something. Like in Louisiana, that trick-or-treater that got killed just going on somebody's property. So my point is that it all comes down to what does education value as far as the experience the student's gonna have. Is our value in international education that they just got to step on the soil of another place? What's the point of being there? Did they have to leave? What's so transformative about it? And how is it going to be that they are not just saying, I went to this other country, but that they understand, and not just the glamorized tropes of an experience, like, oh, I'm in the French Quarter of Louisiana, but I don't know anything about what happened with the storms. What are we going to do to make sure students understand also and are more prepared for how, if they're coming to the US or Canada, for example, how are people maybe going to perceive them? How can they address different things? So all those things to me connect. You can't tell people to move forward and start to make changes on addressing the planet without starting to understand who's in this planet. We keep talking about who's in this country, but you have to understand the people, right? So to me, that's what international education does. It helps people see people as people, want to understand them, empathize for different or similar scenarios, right? And we can find those connections to help make change and be innovative. So I could talk about this for more, but that's it for now.
That's such a good example, Ine, especially with the car. It's such a real everyday example of how to deal with a police officer getting out of the car or don't get out of the car. What do you do? So that was such a good example. I think what I would add to this is maybe I'll throw in a pop culture reference. So how about there's a show on Netflix, I think now, it's Bling Empire. And Bling Empire, there's this like rivalry between two, it's good. It's a juicy, good dramatic show that has nothing to do with this topic. But what I'm going to connect here is that there's a scene where Anna has a party at her house and she has a whole dinner table setting, and they talk about the art of seating and table seatings at events. And they go into it basically saying, you can tell a lot about a person or an organization, let's say in this situation, based on how they do their table seating. So anyone that's closest to the host is how, anyone who's closest to the host tells a lot about how the host sees their power or their relationship with that person. So to tie it into this conversation, when I'm every day in my work as a CEO, a founder, an entrepreneur, as a mentor or advisor to other startups and organizations, one of the first questions are who's at your table, but not only that, who's at the head of the table, who's seated closest to them at that table, who's furthest away in that table in that organization. So we have to always look at that just as leaders. And you don't have to be the CEO of an organization. You could be the head of your student organization, or a member of your student organization, and bring that up and be able to talk about this, or at a member of a sustainability committee and be able to talk about it. Like, take a look at who's at the table, but also what's being fed at that table. What are the utensils at that table? Where are these people living, right? Like, you have to look at every part of that table and not just saying, okay, we have enough diversity points, if you will, right? That's like, we're way past that at this point in 2021. We need way more than that. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done at those tables. And I would say that for now, for this session. Yeah.
I love that metaphor. That's great. And I mean, it really helps you sort of visualize, like, yeah, we have the table looks great in terms of colors, it's like we've got our diversity points, but let's dig a little bit deeper. We're beyond that. That's right. Ine, you mentioned something that I kind of want to hone in on. You said you're not an expert on, racial justice, racial equity, or social justice, or even climate action. And I feel like a lot of people in our field, or a lot of people listening to this podcast now, feel the same way. And so CANIE, we're the Climate Action Network for International Educators. So what would both of you, what would your advice be to people who are listening to the podcast now, but feel like, I'm not the expert, no one wants to listen to me? How do they engage? How do they kind of take this as their own and help progress the field toward a better future? And Ine, let's go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I would start by just echoing some of what Melissa just said. She was talking about who has a seat at the table. I think there's this idea that you have to look like a certain way. I'm just pointing to myself, okay? To be able to talk about something. I'm Black, but that doesn't mean I know about every Black experience. It doesn't mean I know about living in every class situation or anything. I'm an international education expert as far as I'm concerned. I'm a Black and I'm a woman. Those are some of the things that are part of my identity. If you want to know more about something, if you want to start to move forward, you have to kind of put yourself in a space to connect with people, right? And that could be as easy as having a cup of coffee with someone saying, look, I really don't know how to get started. And that could be another colleague, just to give yourself some brainstorm room before you go talk to anyone else if you're intimidated by it, right? It could be that you realize that, oh, where I work has people who are experts in these topics. And I want to figure out how I can take these conversations and bring them into the space that I have, how we can do that together. And I don't have to feel like I'm doing that alone. Maybe you have, a lot of times when I was new in the field and I didn't know how to approach something, whether it was immigration regulation or whether it was putting together a program, I would reach out to my colleagues and say, hey, are any of you doing anything related to this? So the one of my favorite things about international education is you don't have to feel alone. You don't have to feel like you have to do it yourself. And I think that's kind of what CANIE embodies. It's the whole idea that we are all these international educators. We are passionate about, our students, if we're working with students, with making change, with helping people have these transformative experiences, whether they're leaving home or whether right here, wherever they live. But there's going to be a lot of evolution of our societies in this process and different topics that come up that are going to be important for us to not just gloss over. How does the international education industry, how do we get involved with that? And it doesn't have to be that we come up with this huge, big event and have everything mapped out all at once. It just has to be that first step. So if that first step for one person is having a cup of coffee or tea or water with someone in their field or just at their institution, do it. Don't put on your list and be like, I'll do that soon. Do it now. That's something easy you can do now. If it's, I don't know much about this, I'm going to read a book or read an article. Do those things. Start now with those small steps. And when you take those small steps and you successfully get through them, you're going to start to feel like you're accomplishing something. And when you connect with people, you're going to start to feel less worried about not being the expert and more excited about taking action.
Yeah, I think taking a step back and understanding the concept of experts is really interesting and how we perceive experts. In the higher ed experience that I've had, I think the idea of someone being an expert is definitely very colonized. And basically it means that you've done some research. I'm not taking this away from anyone else who has done research on a lot of different things. You wrote a white paper that people may or may not have read. And now you have a faculty job, and that's great. And that is definitely, you have expertise in a certain realm. But then if you look at more, even immigrant communities like my family, or like indigenous groups, right? You're looking at the expert is also someone who's had experience in a different way. So I know in a lot of other communities, or there's in immigrant communities, you go to your elders. They are the experts. They have lived experience. So, we need to diversify the way we look at experts. It might not be the person that has the resume. And if you're only looking at the resume points, you might be just cheating yourself on, what knowledge you're really getting in the industry that you're looking into too. So my advice, if anything, would just be like open that scope. And especially when you get to travel, right? Like you get to meet so many people that are from all different walks of life. Like one of our best partners, I can almost never track him down because he's always in the mountains. Like he is not gonna be your, standard professor he's always barefoot in the mountains somewhere with a motorcycle. And that's how we track him down. But when we get him, he's the person that's gonna teach you everything you need to know about being in a rural community in Nepal, about what it's like to have real stakeholder engagement, not just a lecture from a classroom based on research on stakeholder engagement, as someone who's a part of those communities, right? So it's a little bit different there. And I think having a balance of both is important. But what I'll add to it, it's a journey. I think if you can't become an expert or knowledgeable in anything unless you start somewhere, like what Ine said, I started Green Program when I was 19 years old and an undecided student. But I think what matters in expertise is who society decides to give the microphone to. And if we can elevate voices of other communities, of other people, I think, and if anyone's in the position and have the privilege to do that, like that's a responsibility there. And anyone listening to this is in that position, right? Like if you heard about this event and you heard about Canny and you know about this, you're in international education, you're in that position. You just have to find that little wedge for you to push through as an educator in your field.
Nice, thank you. So people are having these discussions and in some cases making decisions at different points in their climate action, climate justice journey and at different points in their careers. So how can this conversation meet people where they are? Ine, let's go ahead and start with you again.
When you say how can it meet where they are you talking about the fact that someone might feel like they don't know what to do next?
Right. So yeah. So as opposed to from the practitioner perspective, what can I do to help out? So from Canny, from TGP, from the field, how can we meet people where they are to bring them along with us?
Okay. I think one of the key things is for someone to, first of all, there's this idea that I guess people judge themselves of where they are as being right or wrong, maybe not far along or too early in the process to connect with anyone. So first off is for people to start to seek out organizations and colleagues and allies in their particular journey towards working out a climate action plan. And for some people that might start with their personal pieces. Maybe they're just getting familiar with climate pieces and they're trying to find people that are like-minded. A lot of this depends on where you live. I've been thinking a lot about that and how my communities have sometimes driven what I focus on. So if your community isn't aligned, where you physically are, let's say, isn't aligned with where you want to go, you might feel like you have more challenges. And then you might have to go outside of your typical network to find people that can support even thinking about moving forward with something. I would hope international education as a whole would have more space for that, but I've heard a lot of stuff, so I don't know. So as far as how to take your next step in the journey, I don't think there is just one next step. I think it's almost always these parallel things happening at the same time. The self-education, the connecting to finding people that are going to be able to help you understand more, to look into resources like Canny, building a resource library to help have free, accessible resources that don't require membership, don't require finances, to colleagues and students that have some type of knowledge or experience, to community members outside of your typical institution. Those things kind of are paralleled, and you kind of have to look for a little bit from each of those to align them to what works best for you. I don't know if that's so exactly what you're looking for as far as the response, but that's how I think about it. It's never one thing, and I think that can make people feel overwhelmed. So that's why I always say start where you are. Whatever you think is going to be important to do next for you, start with that. And if you're not sure, start to talk with someone about it so you can think about what that's going to look like. And don't let anyone shame you into feeling like, oh, you're not doing enough. You know what? Step back. You know what? Don't tell me I'm not doing enough. I'm trying to move forward. Start where you are. And if you feel like you want to do more, then try to get some partners to do that. Because if you are moving forward, you're doing what you need to be doing.
I do want to just jump in here for a second because Ine, we've had these conversations before, and we've talked about how, when we talked earlier about like power being consolidated in this particular sector, and sort of challenging, Melissa, the notion of experts, we talked about, it tends to be sort of established professionals, sort of older white men who might sort of feel like that vulnerability of like, well, I'm not an expert in this. This is what I know. And when we talk about meeting people where they are, it's like, there's so many, Ine's like the best, like we're the climate action network, like action is just the best action you can take is getting started. And so you said that when we talked last week, and I just thought that was so great and aligned with like, Melissa, when you talked about sort of the pressure and people judging themselves, it's like, this is not that space. This is the space that we just want to all move in the same direction and sort of being more human-centered and people-centered, and sort of meeting people where they are is like a no judgment, just get started. Like we're here for the people who are getting started. And so I know, Melissa, you had sort of, to give you some space here on that, is that you guys had done a lot of that with your resource library as well. So I think that's a super helpful tool if you wanted to share a bit more.
Yeah, thanks for that, CJ. So, I mean, honestly, we can't expect we need more people to be doing something small and perfectly than a very small group of people to do sustainability or racial equality perfectly. It's never going to happen if only the same people keep doing it perfectly. We need every single person to be bought into this and to take some sort of action. The resource library was something that, our team started, but we said along the same vein, there's so many resources out there, but there's no way that we're a team of 5. There's no way that we can just get all of them into this one thing. So how do we invite and open this up to the whole industry? And we'll just be the place where it comes together. How do we bring people together to talk about this? Because everything about environmental justice, environmental racism, about climate change, it's gonna take multi-stakeholder, multi-racial, every category picket. That's what we're gonna need involved here. And that is also, for the record, like that is definitely also the white men up top. Like that's not part that they need to be a part of this conversation, especially if they're gatekeepers to a lot of opportunities for a lot of other organizations and people and other stakeholders that should be at the table too. So I think, meeting people where they are, that's the beauty of it, is that we need people at so many different stages of this entire conversation to get things going. And it makes me think about the sustainability complex, which is something that it's a framework that we talk about for our capstone projects on the green program with all of our students. And a lot of the times working with students, we hear something about, we know climate change is an issue. That's not the question anymore. It's more about how do I actually play a part in this, and how do I take action? Because I'm overwhelmed. Even just hearing that there's not just 8 Millennium Development Goals, now there's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the problems keep growing on our shoulders and the next generation's shoulders. So the challenge is, the worst thing we can do is be paralyzed in that and like have option paralysis and not know which direction to choose. So through the sustainability complex, you can actually look at that framework. And it starts at individual, at the bottom of a triangle. If you just imagine a reverse triangle, and can you have a reverse triangle? I don't know, a triangle with the point on the bottom, and individual on the bottom, all the way up to the global universal scale, if you will. And just from sustainability, for example, as an individual, if you just take that, how do I just start there? Maybe for me, I'm gonna cut down on single-use plastic. I'm going to eat a little bit less meat. I can't commit to fully vegetarian or vegan, but I'm going to do, I'll cut down two less days of meat. That's something that's somewhere, and that counts. We can't dismiss that. So I want to put that out there, because there's so many more people that we just did a little bit, like that one day less meat. That'll make a difference if a million more people do it, right? So that'll make a big difference. And then from there, then you go household. What does that look like? You know what, from now, like maybe my family meals, this is what we're going to do. We're going to source more from local farms, for example. for our groceries. So then from there you can keep scaling, and then next thing you know, it's your neighborhood, and you keep going up from there. So there are frameworks in place that could be a helpful start. If someone wants to say, you know what, I feel comfortable pinpointing community, and I'm going to start at community. If I'm an international educator, I might start there, and that's actually like my office space, you know, or my team that I manage. It might not be the whole university, but I'm going to start there. And we can make equivalents on that framework based on like where everyone is in their role.
And I just want to add that, you know, we are an industry, right? So that means that there are different organizations and associations collectively looking at the same issue. And that's a space for someone to connect to people. And imagine this, imagine if everyone in international education decided to do something small, one small step. And it was something that's small on its own, doesn't seem to have such a big impact. But if everyone was doing it all around the world, that potentially could have this big impact. That's the way I see the potential of this movement that's happening within international education to embrace this topic. That collectively together, we're much stronger than we might feel like we are individually, but that does not negate the fact that our individual actions can also have impact. Even if we don't see it happening, having this immediate piece, they still have an impact. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you. I feel like I could just listen to you both talk about this all day. I think that the different perspectives and the hope and our ability to sort of affect change is within all of us, is amazing. And so, but I do want to pivot and talk about the CANIE Live event. And so this serves as a primer. So whether you're listening to this before the event happens, or whether it's a year from now, and you're listening to it and then you're going to go watch the replay, what should people expect from this event, right? So our CANIE Live, understanding the intersection of sort of climate justice and international education. We're looking to explain like the interconnectedness of like climate change, racial justice, and international education. If you're not watching on YouTube, I'm making little circles with my hands. And like, cause it's a Venn diagram that in an ideal situation has a large intersection of those three for a more climate conscious, racially just international education sector. So if we were to, because we're going to explore each of those intersections. And originally I thought like, let's talk about them here, but actually I think that we'll leave that because I know we're going to be talking about them on the event. But what should people expect out of that? And so Ine, you're moderating, Melissa, you're sort of part of the panel and have helped shape this event. So I would say Melissa, what should people expect? And then Ine, sort of, I'll leave it with you to leave the trails of excitement for people.
Oh, okay. So expect a conversation that will open up thoughts and questions for you to get more curious about the field and your role in helping and taking action in those intersections of environmental justice and racial justice as well. I hope that there's lessons in there and case studies in there that people can take away with, that not only that they can put to work from 9 to 5, but they can put to work in all the hours around the clock as just a human on this planet, and like how we interact with each other and be kinder to one another. There are so many lessons here that I think the industry of international education is in such a juicy opportunity spot. Oh my goodness, like it's horrible. Everything going on is horrible. There's a lot going on, there's horrible. But if we're gonna teach and we're gonna use case studies, like right now, like I know history is so important, and every day I'm talking about the innovation of this and the future of that, but right now it's so interesting to just be a fly on the wall and look at different case studies of what's happening around the world. And what Ine said before, how do we actually apply it back onto campus or back with our students? How do we listen to our students? How do we learn from other cultures and societies? So, it's Ine, it's myself, it's Andrew, it's Robin. They're brilliant and they have so much life experience as well, and also higher education professional experience as well, and in terms of like what they bring to the table. And I'm thrilled even just to like be in their company to have that conversation too, because there's so many lessons that are shared there. But, you know, I again, just hoping that there's takeaways, because it's only part one. That's the coolest part, is like we want to talk about it so everyone's on the same level of being able to understand the basics, like the 101, no shame if you don't know anything. Come in if you know nothing. Bring more people if they know nothing as well. We want them to join the conversation because we have to start somewhere. And then part two is going to be amazing, where we can actually apply your real life challenges as an international educator and workshop them together. So this is a great place to start. And I think if it was like one thing anyone could do, like it would be this, because having a community of people that you know you can call up or rely on, or just be able to ask honest questions if you really don't know what to do, no judgment zone type of thing. That's what I think this is here to do. And we need more of those spaces in this industry. So I'm excited to do it.
Yeah, well said, Melissa. And I think what I would add is that we're calling it part one, but this is never going to be an ending conversation, right? This is a never ending piece of work that we have to keep doing as far as understanding all the justice issues that are surrounding how we move forward with the climate. And they're so deeply embedded, a lot of the injustices in our different societies, that it's not going to be an overnight thing. So one of the pieces that you said earlier, Melissa, was that you have to have different voices at the table. And that's one of the things I'm very excited about with the panel that we have, including yourself. All these different experiences also then provide different perspectives, right? International education is not this one type of industry. There's a lot of different players, a lot of different touch points where an impact can be made. So we have someone who's from more of an academic background. We have someone who's more in a practitioner creating opportunities for students. And then we have someone who's, I would say, working more with organizations to rethink how they approach addressing certain issues such as diversity in that case. So there's some very different models of how people are working in that field. And I think that provides you then with a space to start to think about how you might approach it, but also each of the panelists is also starting from different points, right? Like we said, you don't have to be this expert, and what is an expert anyway? So that's really important too, that you get to hear from people that are maybe further along in thinking about this and people that are in the early stages of talking about this. So I hope to see you all there. And part two, as Melissa said, is going to be a wonderful way for you to not just listen to the panel, but also then connect with colleagues. And you don't have to have gone to part one to enjoy part two, but we'd love you to enjoy both.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing like what you hope this creates, kind of this movement within the field of international education. You know, we've talked about sort of this underlying bubbling, like this is coming up, like we're just kind of riding this wave and kind of organizing people to take action together. So in a quick wrap up, what would you say you really hope for this conversation to accomplish? And then any final parting thoughts you want to leave us with? And then I'll leave it to whichever one of you wants to take that first. Oh, Melissa pointed to Ine.
Yeah, and I want Melissa to end with this because she's going to be one of the speakers too. So I'm the moderator. I'm excited to talk to all of them. I really want people to take away from this that they can do something. They can act. And I think a lot of our conversation today has really emphasized that there's no action too small. Just getting started is half the battle. So if you can move forward and do that, that is key. And we're hoping that this event will be a catalyst for anyone who hasn't started to take action in this, and in whatever form that looks like for you. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, I would love for people to understand, if they don't already, that these topics are not a one put a Band-Aid on it, fix. It's not, we're going to create a program and then we're done and we've checked it off. These are the type of things that we're really going to have to work on together for a long, long time, if not forever, because if you think about it, injustice exists everywhere all the time, and our planet is going to be around with humans on it forever. So we're really going to have to be working on this all the time. So those two things are, to me, really important. And I think also, since we work in education, one thing I would ask everyone to consider is, what type of things can you do to educate yourself? And if this event can help you consider how you can continue to make sure your education is continually evolving and growing, to do that. That's really important, that we're not just serving, let's say, students, because students, scholars, et cetera, but to tell them what they're supposed to be learning and how they're supposed to be living, but we're doing our own work too. Like, what are we going to do to make sure that we are knowledgeable, that we're learning, that we're putting action to what we're learning, and also that we are doing what we can to take care of ourselves and empathize for those around us and work together.
Yes, to all of that. I would love if everyone walked away with a strong sense of curiosity more than what they came in with, because one step, like Ine said, is RSVPing to it. The next step is showing up for it. The other step is making sure it's the only window open and you're not answering emails and pretending to listen, right? So having a presence and the intentionality needs to start now if it hasn't already. And being able to show up for it is a good step, but then I'm hoping that there's one piece of, if it's not this podcast, it's something in that event that makes you be curious and say, I wonder what if. So what if for my students? What if for the communities that we go to? What if for my colleagues? What if for my campus housing? I don't know. What if for anything that's in your world that you deal with every day? And you have some sort of direction that you can pick to explore that further after this event. And then know that you have a network of people that you could email, contact, get in touch with, myself included, to just brainstorm and continue those conversations, because it's not expected to be fixed overnight. To be honest, it all should have been done a long time ago, but we need to start, and it's going to take some time. So know that you have a network of people that are working in the same direction. And it's going to take accountability, like I would bounce it back to the audience in terms of knowing that it's not enough to just show up for the event. So I'm going to put that challenge out there, and for part 2, maybe there's going to be that saga or that trilogy of being able to come back and actually have some reporting and be able to get curious about, like, what happens above the bureaucracy, like what happens above all these overwhelming steps of a higher education institution if you really want to get something passed, and be able to hang on to that curiosity and that what if, because that's what turns into motivation and what turns into action as well. So I'll leave it at that for now, but come to the event. It's going to be a great conversation, and just the beginning, like Ine was saying too.
And I love this. I'm glad that you said the thing that is probably one of my favorite things you said last week when we were chatting about this, which is like, this is the second best time to do this. Like the best time was before, but I'm so glad we're doing it now, because it's the second best time to do this. So it's super exciting that it's coming up. And if you're listening to this after, it was awesome. And so we're so excited. Thank you to both of you for joining us as guests. Adrienne, as always, please come back anytime you want, and always, forever, welcome, open invitation. This was awesome. I'm so grateful for this conversation. Adrienne, parting words.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that I think this is such a beautiful example of the Sustainable Development Goal number 17, Partnership for the Goals. So I think from the very beginning, we're bringing together the expertise of CANIE, and, Ine, we're so grateful to have you to part of CANIE with all of your experience in the field, and with TGP coming together. I feel like it's just a really good example of working together, and then extending into this event. All of the participants are going to have this extended network of people to partner with to really address some of these major issues, which, like you said, should have been addressed a long time ago, but here we are, and let's do it.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks so much, ladies.
Thank you so much. See you on the
Thank
9th.
you.
The CANIE Climate Dialogues podcast is engineered by Diego Mendez, who is based in Vancouver. He edits these episodes together, making us look and sound super professional. And also, he uploads these episodes to wherever you listen or watch this podcast.